Grim Dawn is quite possibly one of the greatest ARPGs I have ever played. It has an incredible atmosphere, recognizable characters, complex itemization and stats, and a dual class system that allows for continuous replayability to try out each and every class combination. The mechanics of this game are well developed, and every piece of content has a purpose. And while I have nothing but praise for the game now, about 50 hours in, it took me a while to get hooked. I actually started this review way back in 2022. It was one of the first ARPGs that was recommended to me by all of you beautiful viewers. Honestly, I've been playing Grim Dawn on and off for a while. It just never really stuck with me, and it took me until this last dive into the game to finish it, appreciate the game on a whole new level, and also try to understand why I felt like I didn't want to immediately create another character and dive back in. On paper, Grim Dawn is one of the ARPG greats. I truly think so, but I don't think it'll be everybody's favorite ARPG. Grim Dawn is a different experience than other modern ARPGs. It's slower paced, it focuses on questing and exploration, it provides the template for you to create your own character with a number of different ways to customize each and every stat that you could possibly think of. But most importantly, I think Grim Dawn focuses on catering to a specific audience. If you were a fan of Diablo 2, you would probably think that Grim Dawn is the natural evolutionary next step. If you were a fan of Titan Quest, well, this is a game made in the same engine, so you'll see a lot of similarities in the style and mechanics. Grim Dawn focuses on creating an RPG with traditional RPG elements, focused on a story with meaningful choices, mechanics and rewards that make the world ripe for exploration, and combat and build customization that is heavily determined by your class. Jumping into the game, the first thing you do is create your character with a very limited character creation menu. You are shown the only cutscene of the game, which explains how you were taken over by the Aether and were almost killed by your captors, when suddenly the Aether leaves you and you're saved to fight with your former captors against your former possessor. This is going to sound pretty arbitrary, but I feel like a good and simple example of how different Grim Dawn is to other similar ARPGs is that you can move the camera. There is a true north, and you can spin around to see other things around you. While it doesn't have too many practical uses, moving the camera like this is something that most top-down hack-and-slash isometric ARPGs don't let you do. This is mostly reserved for story-focused RPGs, because along with its practical uses, having control of the camera establishes more of a connection between the character and the player. In other words, it lets you see the world through your character's eyes rather than a set viewpoint curated for the player. Your journey throughout the game is to eradicate the Aether and those who would use it to destroy the world, even though the world is pretty damn bleak already. From this point on, the story and lore are mostly given to you through quest text, short dialogues with other characters, and lore notes hidden throughout the world. It can be a lot of reading or waiting for voice actors to get through dialogue, so it may seem daunting to stick with the story the whole way through, but I definitely think an understanding of the story and its characters will increase your overall enjoyment of the game. The gameplay loop is pretty simple, but can include a lot of different elements depending on what you want to engage in. The main questline will have you helping the citizens of each area in various tasks that usually ends up in defeating a big bad guy before moving on to the next area. Pretty normal ARPG stuff. Now where it gets interesting is when you choose to engage with the other things, like exploration. There are a ton of things to find out in the world, enemies to kill, secret power-up points in the form of these desecrated shrines, and just a crap ton of loot. The elite and boss enemies that you'll run into actually have their own loot tables. They drop items that are lore specific to them, which I think is an awesome touch. Depending on how invested in the grind you want to get, you can also raise your reputations with factions around the world. Each faction offers their own benefits when you get to certain reputation levels. This was the one mechanic that I did not get really invested in. Once you get to a trusted status with a faction, you can actually start completing bounties for them. This gives a bunch of rep and experience, but you have to complete one at a time, so it takes a while. And in order to get trusted status with your faction in the first place, you have to complete the set quests they have and also kill a good amount of their enemies. I'm sure this grind gives you plenty of good rewards, and maybe it's something that holds a lot of weight for higher difficulties, but I personally passed on it for my run through on normal. Anyway, all of these different mechanics make up the world and your gameplay within it. I would say out of all of these, just having a base understanding of the story and an interest in the world around you is probably the most essential, because when you're exploring the game for the first time, experiencing everything and finding your way through these large open maps, it'll take a long time to do anything. So enjoying the story, the fantasy of the world, and the little notes and hidden secrets in every part of the map, this will be a huge part of your reason to keep moving through the game. Actually, in my experience, the majority of your enjoyment comes from two things. First, enjoying the different environments the game puts you in, the monsters that inhabit it, and the story behind why you're there. And second, absolutely pulverizing enemies with the combat and stat mechanics. The absolute best part of this game is the power fantasy that comes with the character and build customization. When you first start out the game, you're a weak little adventurer. You are literally at death's door and someone saves you to be used in the war against the Aether. But by the end of the campaign, you feel strong. And I don't mean like clear a screen full of trash mobs all at once kind of strong. I mean standing toe to toe with big monsters with large health bars and heavy attacks that you actually have to fight and whack a couple times kind of strong. I mean taking these large, powerful monsters and sending them flying away like a little paper doll. I mean shaking the damn screen with your absolute godlike power, causing ripples in the ground and cracks in the air purely with your strength and will. I'm exaggerating a bit, but it is a big difference with Grim Dawn versus other ARPGs. Don't get me wrong, it is a hack and slash game at its core. There are definitely lots of enemies to smash, but there are definitely less than, say, Path of Exile or Last Epoch. Again, I feel the combat and enemy design is more closely related to Diablo 2, where there are powerful key monsters surrounded by meaningful enemies rather than just filling the screen with hundreds of them at once. The biggest reason combat ends up feeling so good though is that you have so much freedom when it comes to building your character. The class system has a nice little twist on it, which is that you can pick two different classes and smash them together to become a new dual class. So say you pick a shaman and a soldier like I did, you become a warder. My first character was a Nightblade and a cultist, which became a witch hunter. Choosing your classes becomes the most important decision in your entire Grim Dawn experience. Each class has its own skill tree, which gives you your choice of class spells. Every level, you get 3 points to allocate to your skill trees, either putting all in one class or splitting the points between the two. When allocating the points, you also have to choose between powering up your skills within the tree or upgrading your class. Putting more points in your class will unlock more of the tree and eventually opens up your capstone abilities. It takes a while to get to the end here unless you really focus on one class. I took notes from both classes, but leaned on my shaman class a bit more, and it took me until level 50 to unlock the last line of talents. But obviously, that's kind of the point. You have to balance the need for upgrading the skills you can use now with investing in your class to unlock more powerful abilities later on. I didn't reach the capstone ability until I had already beat the campaign on normal difficulty and started the campaign all over again in the elite difficulty. I think that's pretty much where the feeling of accomplishment comes from in Grim Dawn. Your level up dopamine hits hard, especially once you hit level 40 or so. Those 3 points become increasingly more important because you know you'll have to go a fair bit of time before you can get more. And each level you sit and think, what am I going to do with my points? Invest in one of my classes for the powerful stuff coming up, or power up one of my current skills because I need more damage and defenses now. It's a weighty decision, and it makes the accomplishment of creating a working build so much sweeter. Now you can actually respec points at any time if you go back to the main base, so you're never truly locked into what you're spending points on, but you can't respec your classes or take points out of your class mastery, so keep that in mind. But the heavy use of dopamine points don't stop with skills. Along with the 3 skill points you get when you level up, you also get a single attribute point to spend on the 3 main attributes, Physique, Cunning, and Spirit. I'll get into stats in a second, but just really quickly, I love how simple this is. Physique is your strength equivalent, Cunning is your dexterity equivalent, and Spirit is your intellect equivalent. Dive a little deeper and it's not that simple, but on the surface, it's nice. You only have 3 stats to worry about and you can affect them directly every time you level up. Then for even more dopamine points, you also have the Devotion system, which is this huge map of constellations that you can put points into to alter your stats and sometimes be given boons from the gods in the form of skills or buffs. You don't get devotion points from leveling up though, you get them from shrines. These shrines are hidden all over the world, I think they're like 20-ish or something on the normal difficulty at least, and they need cleansing. Once you cleanse them either by killing enemies or offering an item, you'll unlock a single devotion point. These constellations provide incredibly powerful increases to your stats, so exploration to find these shrines is definitely encouraged. Put these 3 sources of build customization together and there's a feeling of true freedom that you get in creating your build. With the class system, you choose your template, you choose your skills and mold the class archetype to the way that you want to play. With the attribute system, you make heavy-handed, high-level alterations to your character's playstyle, either strength, dexterity, or intellect based. And with the devotion system, you can affect the more detailed parts of your character's stats, drilling down into the individual modifiers. This isn't even including the loot and crafting elements that make up your chase for better and better gear. I wanted to specifically save that for last because I think my only negative critique of the game comes with the stat system and by extension the loot and crafting. In a nutshell, my problem with the stat system is the sheer quantity of the modifiers. There's just a lot of different modifiers here. And over time you realize that it's actually not that hard to learn all of them, but when you're first starting out, it's a pretty daunting task. Throughout the game, loot will drop from everything. Bosses, monsters, tree stumps, boxes. You'll always be on the search for loot, and loot will always be searching for you. You have a fairly simple loot filter to use in case you would like to, but that'll come once you understand the stat system a bit more. If you take a look at some of these equipment panels, I think you can already tell what I mean by the quantity of stat modifiers. Some of these equipment descriptions are full college essays affecting 5 or more stats at once. Some are percent and others additive. Some are resistance modifiers, some are damage modifiers. There are life modifiers and energy modifiers. There are modifiers to certain class-specific skills. Even the basic yellow rarity of items that you get at low levels can have like 4 or 5 modifiers on them. And like I said, once you sit and take the time to learn this, the stats get a lot easier. Your eyes start to know what to look for. You know what stats you want for your specific build. Do I want more bleed? Do I want more elemental damage? Do I need more health or defense? It makes sense, and it starts to go so much faster because you don't need to look at all of the stats on an item. But again, when I first started playing the game, this wall of text was just random hieroglyphics to me, and for each item that I thought may have a chance to be better for me, I had to go through this long mental process to figure out which one was better for my build. Really though, the loot reflects just how many stats there are in the game. Taking a look at the character stats panel, I mean, it's a lot. All of these are different stats that you can affect with gear or other build components, and it becomes a bit overwhelming for new players. A great example are the resistances. There are 19 different resistances in the game. Don't worry, I shall list them for you. Fire resistance, cold resistance, lightning resistance, poison and acid resistance, which counts as 1, pierce resistance, bleed resistance, vitality resistance, aether resistance, stun resistance, chaos resistance. These are the main 10 you'll find on the main character window. If you flip to the 3rd page of the character window, you also have physical resistance, disruption resistance, life leech resistance, energy leech resistance, trap resistance, this reduces the duration of traps on you, petrify resistance, freeze resistance, sleep resistance, and slow resistance. This is just the resistance list. There are plenty more stats on this character panel, trust me. And damn, I think I've said resistance enough for today. Crafting is affected by this complex stat system, but the crafting mechanic itself is actually fairly straightforward. You find recipes out in the world. Once you learn the recipe, you can bring materials to the blacksmith and he'll make items for you. You can make some powerful items at the blacksmith, like legendary and epic items. You just need to find the recipe first. On top of that, there is an item type called relics that can only be obtained by crafting them at the blacksmith. These are equipable items, so you're going to want to get one eventually in order to optimize your build. If you don't want to engage with the crafting system too much though, you can also just use some of the crafting materials directly on your gear. Using them this way will give your gear certain bonuses depending on which material you used. It's fairly simple, and it turns into a huge way to get triggered defensive or offensive spells. Listen, this complex stat system and overwhelming wall of text for loot descriptions isn't necessarily a bad thing for everyone. This is what makes for a complex ARPG that allows for you to have fun diving into the depth of a build. What I'm trying to point out is how daunting this can be to someone coming into Grim Dawn for the first time. Once you put some time in understanding how the stats work, looking at loot becomes a lot easier. You understand how you can make a build without looking at half of these stats, and you realize that many of these stats don't even really become relevant until you hit higher difficulties. New players just have to get to that point. This may not be a big deal to many ARPG fans. I think we're kind of used to looking at hundreds of items, spending the same amount of time comparing loot that we do killing monsters. But back in 2022, when I started with Grim Dawn, I had just gotten into ARPGs. I was a complete newbie to Path of Exile and Last Epoch, and I hadn't played Diablo 2 yet. So when I dove into the world of Grim Dawn, I very easily got overwhelmed with how much time I was spending comparing loot and doing math in my head. Now that I've played Diablo 2, I've learned to appreciate and love the pacing of Grim Dawn, and now that I've spent about 1,500 hours in Path of Exile, I've learned to appreciate and love the complexity of the stat system. And now I've created a Demolitionist and Arcanist combined into a Sorcerer, and I'm excited to try out this combination and see how powerful I can make this build. This is a big part of the game, but that's really my only negative critique. Other parts of the game may not be the most amazing, but nothing about the game is bad. And now that we're past the negative part of the review, let's do a little bit of a speed round. The world is defined and colorful, with different locations having very visibly different color palettes and detailed environments. The underground areas, the caves, and the tombs are filled with colors and small environmental details like abandoned mining materials and abandoned camps. Even the more beautiful scenic locations like forest areas or mountaintops give you a sense of dread. I've played through the first part of the campaign 3 times before writing this review, and there are still little secrets I'm finding. Secret bosses, quests that I didn't know existed, shrines that I missed. Cool things are everywhere. One underrated part of this game is just the fact that it's not technically a live service game. Instead, it's a full game for a price with DLC available for more content. I just played the base game, and I see an endless amount of hours of playtime possible here. It's nice to know that the game is complete and I can come back to it whenever I like. There have been 3 DLC expansions and a number of smaller updates since the game was launched, and later this year we'll get the new Fangs of Astrakarn expansion. Late last year there was a free update to the base game that changed a number of different things, including adding quality of life features and a dodge roll button, because it's 2024 and every game needs a dodge roll button to be considered in the cool kids club. The end of the campaign is pretty epic. I'm not going to give any spoilers or anything, but out of all the boss fights in the game, I think this was the only one that really put on the theatrics. For the rest of the bosses, while the mechanics are solid and the combat is satisfying, I never really felt like things were that intense. It was a lot of standing and hitting and making sure you dodged the heavy attacks. There wasn't much of a theatrical show to any of the fights, which means you don't really end up remembering many details of the fight other than maybe the name of who you needed to kill. But if it wasn't for the quest text and how unique the bosses looked, I wouldn't really call any of these boss fights very memorable. But maybe that's just because I was on a low difficulty and my build was able to kill most of them fairly easily. When you finish the campaign, you unlock the next difficulty up. Think Normal, Nightmare, and Hell from Diablo 2. Maybe the bosses are more memorable when they take some strategy to defeat. But I think I'll cut it off here. Grim Dawn is definitely one of the greats. The ARPG genre needs a game like this. This is a true RPG with action, combat, and hack and slash loot-driven gameplay, and I am here for it. I'm actually debating whether or not to get the new expansion when it comes out, and maybe try out the Ashes of Malmuth expansion. Grim Dawn is slower paced and a game that you can enjoy on your own time, with probably the best class customization dopamine hits I've seen in any ARPG, but I can definitely see why not everyone finds it to be as good as I do. So in the comments below, I want to hear your thoughts. Let me know what you think of Grim Dawn, if you like it or not, and any critiques you may have. But most importantly, I hope you enjoyed the video. Leave a like if you liked it and subscribe for more casual reviews. I hope you enjoy your adventure into the grimmest of all dawns, and I can't wait to see what we talk about next.